The biggest and most intense construction project that needed to be done was the septic. Gross. We had 3 septic systems and all 3 had issues. We used the local septic guy to pump and they found problems with all 3 tanks. The first tank was actually a grease trap from the restaurant that a former owner had hooked a toilet up to. So we had solidified steak grease and waste together like a rock in the first tank. We were in the back of the back house when the driver came up to us and slammed this chunk of solid grease with toilet paper and some shit stuck to it. Slam that hunk of sewage right on the barbecue. We were, of course, not going to let them gross us out. So we just said, "Oh, okay, thanks." Fortunately, the barbecue was leftover trash from the former tenant. The septic for one house was older and had a weak leach system, and also had a couple of little fixes, a couple T's and 2 lids. The last system at the back house needed a new leach line. Whoever ran the leach line did it towards the mountain. The problem with that is that even if you have a fall, the mountain sheds water both above and below ground. We pumped the second tank and the spring of leach just kept filling the tank back up. It was a real shitty spring underground. The solution was a new leach line for the back house, ran parallel to the mountain. A new leach line for the middle house to make sure we're good, and the restaurant needed to be abandoned or completely redone. At this point in the game, we had a budget, but I needed to be as frugal as I could. I knew that my buddy Jimmy had recently had some issues and was in jail, so I decided to get a quote from his father, who also does septic. His father and him haven't gotten along for some time, and they weren't too receptive to our call, but we did find out that Jimmy was out. I then contacted Jimmy, and we had a septic guy and helper lined up. He suggested that since I was short on funds, he would do it time and materials. I was super shocked with that and was intending on giving Mr. Jimmy a really nice bonus when he's finished. That never happened, but such a really interesting stuff did. Jimmy was just out of jail, or I'm thinking maybe prison, because I know from experience jail doesn't give you a cellmate. Not too sure on that, but his buddy from the pen was now his assistant. I have to take this time to explain Mr. Jimmy's backstory. I don't recall telling it yet. I have known Jimmy since before he even smoked bud, or maybe just a little. He was a young go-getter in the septic business. It was my go-to guy for years. I can recall in one of the last jobs that Jimmy did for me before his mother ended escrow billing and he had issues. Escrow billing ended our septic relationship, but his first little mistake really changed Mr. Jimmy forever. I have been told the story by another and by Jimmy, and they only vary in one aspect. Jimmy was having trouble with his then wife, now ex. Oildale is rough, a primarily white or Caucasian area of Bakersfield. Yeah, it's kind of white trash. Some good folks there, though. Some. I can recall on a septic inspection where Jimmy was asking me to go drinking with him in Bakersfield and how fun it was to get wild. There are no way I would go do anything like that. I learned my lesson with that type of BS many years earlier, and I don't do anything without Wendy anyways. I told him back then, you should move to a place they have off Caliente Creek. Stay up here and get drunk. You can't get into any trouble. Of course, he was out to get back at his wife for cheating, separating, and getting a boyfriend. Jimmy stayed there in Oildale, insisted on him getting arrested and instead of him getting arrested for a bar fight or a DUI, this here below is what went down. She was dating this guy who knew that at the time Jimmy had a pound of legal cannabis he grew stashed in the house down in Oildale. The boyfriend and his still wife broke in the house. As Jimmy described it, he heard the guy coming down the hall. He hid his back against the wall and did a 45-degree turn. I could hear the guy creeping down the hall. He saw the gun appear first. As the robber was leading with it, Jimmy grabbed the gun, ripped it from the would-be robber's hand. Jimmy then chased him down the hall and out the home. Just outside, Mr. Jimmy caught up the guy and pursued chase, ending with Jimmy standing above the guy who was screwing his wife and possibly trying to kill him or at least rob him. This is where the story varies slightly. Jimmy said he shot next to the guy's head as a warning and then let the guy run away. The other version was that Mr. Jimmy shot his ear off. I did ask Jimmy later if he shot the ear off. He didn't reply, but did smile. You would think that's poetic justice, but no. Jimmy was charged with all sorts of bullshit while the robber who possibly going to kill Mr. Jimmy, the robber's boyfriend, was charged with nothing. The robber who was the boyfriend was charged with nothing. I think it was 6 years he got and served 3, or maybe it was 10 and got served 5. Really not sure, but it was wrong no matter what it was. Jimmy was never quite the same after that. I call my friends or acquaintance with substance problems just that, as having substance problems, but others are just tweakers. Mr. Jimmy develops a substance problem. So I had some real relief that I had my old buddy Jimmy now showing up to get this done. We started with material collection. That was interesting. We rented equipment and he picked it up along with materials. When we show up for the job, he was willing and ready. He had his cellmate and his assistant, and he brought his girlfriend along. It was a 2-day job, so they went ahead and got them we got them a room the first night. All was well, and they showed up and were digging all day. The assistant was taking a pickaxe and jackhammer to the solidified grease at the old restaurant. He was chest deep in that cesspit, chipping away and bagging rocks of shit grease. Mr. Jimmy and his lady were working on a mini excavator. He did a great job on the prep work. I was getting late, and Jimmy wanted to eat there and keep going. His lady went up to the store and brought back some barbecue. We warned him that the barbecue was the former tenant's, and the other septic guy put a rock of solidified shit grease on it. They, of course, still used it and said that was okay because it heated up enough. Hell, I guess that's true. I don't know. Septic guys, man. Both Wendy and I went to bed happy that he was handling everything and everything was cool. That sure changed. The next morning on the job site, Mr. Jimmy was in serious distress. His lady bailed on him in the middle of the night. At the time, it was really weird because they were staying way up at the river, at least at this place. They said she just left and Mr. Jimmy's assistant had all the grease bagged up. Wendy later pointed out that he was leaning on the bags of shit grease, smoking, gross and conspicuous to her. They had also finished in the early morning on the made trench, done and buried. Jimmy and his assistant were acting weird and wanted to leave and come back another day. Wendy wasn't having that at all. We had to rent the excavator, and this job needed to be done that day. We kept them on site and forced them to finish in the late afternoon. They were sluggish all day, and it appeared that wherever the girlfriend went, that's where their motivation went too. When your motivation comes from a little baggie, it really sucks to lose it. Wendy did wonder, did Jimmy off that girl? The hotel where they were staying's manager is a friend of Wendy's, so they looked at the cameras and the girl went in and wasn't seen leaving the room. It was more than questionable to both of us. We were, however, glad that Mr. Jimmy's finished most of the job. There were a couple of lids that needed to be done and a filter, but they did a great job and I appreciate the work. I told Jimmy I'd give him a bonus when he came back with the lids. Both of them are exhausted when they finished, and they asked if we would put them up in a room so they could go to the bar in Kernville. I should have known that was a mistake. We got them a room right across from the bar. I paid in cash for the hours they worked as agreed. We left and they were completely disconnected when I paid them, totally focused on this girl. It made it all seem so weird. Wendy and I made some jokes to ourselves and maybe a few others that she was in our leach field. About 3 days later, Wendy got a call from the fire investigator in the arson unit. When she answered, she had thought they were going to tell us that about our fire, we lost our ranch, and its investigation. Instead, they were questioning us about Jimmy's whereabouts that day. Wendy had said that he was with us all day and he couldn't be implemented in anything. We told them we got the room and the time. I figured we were doing Jimmy a favor. The fire guy said, "Oh, that's right what we figured. The fire was in the evening and Jimmy was seen fleeing the scene." Jimmy also spoke to the bartender who she knew from the bar that Jimmy was at. According to her, the two of them came in with an attitude. They kept talking about this girl and how messed it was that Kevin and Wendy with Sacred Mountain didn't pay them more money for the job. As Wendy is telling me this, I can feel myself getting upset, but it gets better. They were asking to leave the bar only after they were announcing to everyone at the bar that they would sell anyone the room key for the hotel we just got them for $20. After leaving the bar, the hotel was called, and then the hotel barred them from the room, obviously. They then went to the diner next door and were asked to leave there. After all of that, they loaded up in the commercial plumbing van with the excavator behind in tow towards the lake. I can't remember who called the sheriff on them, but the sheriff was unable to apprehend a plumbing van with excavator in tow, called in as a dangerous drunk driver. They drove to Lake Isabella and through it without any sheriff stopping them. According to the arson guy, they were seen leaving Lake Isabella in a hurry, fleeing what was believed to be an arson fire. For a month or two, we had real questions of what went on and why. Only after we saw Jimmy down in Bakersfield with the same girl were we able to connect the dots. She escaped that room and did so with their bag of drugs for the job. Tweeker bullshit. So that covers the girl who was alive. Great. Now how about that arson fire? We heard from some neighbors a few weeks later that the house that had burned may have been a tweak dealer's place. I figure it was a tweaker fire from the cooking old Jimmy was just there picking up on the way out of town. What a rough night. We did hear from the people around town that this crazy septic guy, we did hear from people around town about them crazy septic guys. We got 3 excellent systems and I would have paid the bonus even after all the bullshit, but he didn't bring me back the 2 lids. I had to do it myself. I happened to see a concrete guy I knew from years back. I asked him to look at a job. The back house needed the pad cut in the center and repoured. There was a massive tree root lifting up the concrete. We also needed some work in the restaurant. That concrete guy wanted $12,000, and that wasn't to repour. He wanted to grind it. That would have broke the bank, so we scheduled 10 yards of concrete ourselves to be delivered, and we would do it ourselves. We really had no other choice. We poured 10 yards of concrete, one full truckload on our 18th anniversary. It was good. We didn't go with that pro. The original 1950 concrete was about 4 inches thick. Grinding and replacing would have not worked. It's good, healthy foundation for our family now, almost completely smooth, and it's right here. Woohoo! Excuse me. Now that we had septic, we could use the concrete floor. It was time to get this roof done before the rain. We first hired old Billy. Billy showed up and was super excited to show how good he could do on our roof. He was high-stepping to keep up with me in the back of the home. As I walked by the open septic hole, I could see in the corner of my eye, and I could see the corner of my eye just disappear. His high-stepping put him a first step into a 6-foot septic hole. The lid was on it 6 feet, so it wasn't nasty, but real funny after. At first, I immediately said, "What the F?" He jumped out and said, "I'm good, Kev, I'm good." He worked that day, but I could tell he was in pain. The roof became a real problem. We had to strip off the old and shore up some wood, then re-roof. The roof was the next item that just out of budget to have someone do. We bought the materials and got started. Logan, Billy, and myself stripped the old roof with flathead shovels. We then dealt with all the wood fixes. I can remember being on the roof frantically trying to fix sections with summer storms coming in every few days. The tarping was not cool. Off and on with tarps until we were done. I started doing the roof work late in the day to avoid the heat. One evening while on the roof, leaning forward nailing, I started to feel that same old pressure come back in my head. The front of my brain was now waking back up. For the next few days, the symptoms came back. I wasn't back on my oil yet, but now every afternoon I needed to be real careful. Wendy was able to find a guy to come finish the roof install for a decent price. Now with all the demo was done, all the materials were on site. I was glad the major part of the house was now good. However, I was now in a bit of a worry mode about my condition. I didn't want to go back to being a retard, brain damaged and sick. Whew. And at that, I got to take a break or I'll do just that. So